All right, your favorite Aryan Brotherhood's least favorite Aryan brother, Michael Thompson, was convicted, I think yesterday, of perjury and fraud. It's about $100,000. We're going to show clips of the old story where he was charged 3 years ago on a big EDD thing. Now, Thompson is a guy that you may know from National Geographic. He first appeared in 2007, one of the first people that the average person ever heard about with the Aryan Brotherhood, gregarious and likable on camera. And after 46 years in prison, he was released. And I think that this is a very interesting and karmic story. So this was really back in the early days of us first seeing people inside prison getting interviewed and talking. On the 1 hour show, Thompson, whose nickname supposedly was Sky because he was some sort of Native American, so he claims, painted quite an image for himself. Man of honor and violence who was framed for the murders he originally went to prison for. A guy who ruled the prison yard through gladiator-like knife fights, sometimes against whole groups of enemies which he would dispatch by himself. Let him tell it. Now, Mike Thompson claims he dropped out of the AB because he was outraged that the gang authorized the murder of another gang dropout's father. So that's when Thompson's career as an informant got started. Some say he did it to get out of the crosshairs of Robert Blinky Griffin, a rival leader within the AB, but we'll get back to that. So Thompson testified back in '83. This hitman in the case that was going after the dropout's family, somebody did get killed, that guy got put on death row. And after Thompson helped put that guy on death row, he kept testifying in all sorts of trials and getting himself in all sorts of legal imbroglios, which he could use to his own advantage, all up until the 1990s. 1987, he roped an LA sheriff down at the county jail into getting involved in trying to sell stolen cars to contacts Thompson supposedly had down in Mexico, but of course Thompson set him up, and that and several LA sheriff's deputies caught cases in 1987. In their response, state prosecutors hardly defended Thompson against these attacks, noting that he testified to avoid potential racketeering charges and in the hopes of, quote, pleasing parole authorities down the line. In sum, no rational juror could have convicted anyone of anything solely on the word of the admitted perjurer and schemer Thompson, the prosecutors themselves wrote. And that was before Thompson blew his parole with his big EDD fraud case. Now, despite his history of cooperation in all these different cases, Thompson still had a hard time getting out. For one thing, he wouldn't admit that he had ever killed anybody. This is what Thompson told the parole board. And until recently, it's quite rare for people with life sentences to ever get paroled in California. And though he had worked with law enforcement so extensively that he bragged about being served a complete turkey dinner with his own carving knife while in the LA County Jail, he still was having a hard time getting out. California governors often overrule the parole board, even if they want to let the guy out. He never confessed to his crime, which it's amazing he got paroled without ever taking culpability for his crime, which was a double homicide. He claims a guy he was working for, he heard that these other guys were going to kidnap this guy's children, which is wild. Why would somebody kidnap somebody's children? And so that guy hired Thompson and another guy to unalive those two people who also owned reefer ranches up in rural California north of San Francisco. And the real story that came out in court is that he wanted one of these guys' wife, and he took her, kind of semi-kidnapped her. And anyways, and then he became, in about 1982, I think he saw his chance, or so he thought, to get out of prison when the Aryan Brotherhood Commission split, and some of them voted to have Curtis Price go out and whack some civilians who were the family members of a guy that had turned informant, an AB member that had turned informant against them. And Thompson, it was such a heinous crime, Thompson thought if he turned all them in and flipped on the AB, I'm sure he assumed he was going to be getting out sometime in the 80s, but he didn't get out till 2019. He promptly caught this $400,000 fraud case that got broken down yesterday. He was found guilty of $100,000 in fraud. They were pressuring homeless and transients and taking their Social Security and other identities, setting up unemployment stuff online for them. What a predatory crime, and then just keeping it all. Another story of Steven Seagal-like heroics were key to Big Mike securing parole. The 6'4" Thompson, who says he could bench press 600 pounds back in the day when he was hanging with AB royalty Tyler Hulk Bingham and Barry the Baron Mills, said he took a vow of nonviolence that withstood a true test. In 2015, a Mexican mafia hitman got to him in prison and attacked him using a homemade knife, slicing his ear in half and cutting him in the throat. When the would-be assassin stabbed him a third time, mind you, he's supposedly cut in the throat, has his ear hanging, Michael Thompson grabbed a shank, and he said, quote, "There was a window of opportunity. I saw it. I played it through my head. I knew what I could do to him." But, Michael Thompson said, this is where my vow of nonviolence kicked in. To the parole board, laid the knife down and sat on it and waited for staff to come and get his assassin. But I don't know if this stuff actually happened or if the parole board verified it. His lack of violence over past decades, quote, "clearly shows that you know how to manage yourself for a prolonged period of time," a parole board commissioner said. "Whatever reservations we have about your personality, is basically overcome by that huge objective fact." So it was a big deal when Michael Thompson walked out of prison in August of 2019, and now, less than 2 years after being out, bam, he's back in jail for EDD fraud. So they're finding homeless people up in Lake County, which is a small county, only 70,000 population. It's north of Sonoma, so it's like north of the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, all that. And there was also the allegations of a $1.5 million wildfire prevention. Like, I guess they would chop down trees to stop wildfire. They weren't doing that. But in the end, and his buddy, Eric Hutchins, or his co-defendant, was already found guilty. He's serving 8 years. And he didn't do 45 years already. So if he got 8 years, you can imagine Thompson's going to get more. Thompson blamed Hutchins for everything. Of course, he likes to blame others for his crimes. And some of the evidence introduced against him, including all sorts of documents filled out in other people's names, and that they showed Thompson's handwriting samples on the handwriting on these documents, and the judge found that they matched. And Thompson even said, "Oh, that sure does look like my writing, but it's not mine." The judge or jury, who I'm not sure if it's a judge or jury trial, didn't believe him, and he was found guilty. So, once a predator, always a predator in the case of Michael Thompson. Rene Boxer Enriquez, the Mexican Mafia version of Michael Thompson, just got out. We did a soft white underbelly interview. I doubt if he'll catch another case. He's so under the gun, I doubt if he would risk it. And also Thompson, they call it crime of opportunity. A lot of people that weren't otherwise criminals got involved in EDD fraud and paycheck protection fraud because it was so easy, or so people thought. But of the $20 billion that California feels it was defrauded out of, it's already gotten $6 billion back. People are giving back money even 5 years later. So, according to prosecutors, Thompson and his co-defendant, whom he met in prison, must have been on the special needs yards, aka protective custody, tricked at least 16 people to give up their personal information to them to misuse. Thompson and his cronies would get homeless people's Social Security numbers by telling them they were going to help them fill out their unemployment forms, and then of course they would keep all the money. And I would imagine for a homeless person, Michael Thompson was a pretty intimidating guy, and they were probably afraid to ask for their money back. Now, like all good tales of karma, this story circles back to the beginning. Let's go into detail about the case that got Michael Thompson moved out of general population, had him dropping out of the Aryan Brotherhood, and put the guy named Price on death row. So it's 1983. Michael Thompson is a proud member of the newly formed Aryan Brotherhood Commission. They're meeting at Palm Hall in Chino, and in 1983 the commission had a hitman named Curtis Floyd Price to murder Richard Barnes, who was an LA resident whose son Stephen had dropped out of the AB and agreed to testify. Stephen Barnes was in witness protection, so the gang settled for murdering his father. Thompson says he was the only high-ranking member to vote against the hit and that it left a bad taste in his mouth. He dropped out of the gang soon after and testified against Price, who was sentenced to death for indeed murdering Barnes and a woman named Elizabeth Hickey. Now, some people say Big Mike had just run afoul of Robert Blinky Griffin, whose nickname Blinky came from the fact he supposedly could get you killed by just blinking his eye at one of the AB hitters. And they say that's what prompted him to his change of heart. Not any concern about women and children. And maybe he just needed somebody to hang out to dry. Maybe that was Curtis Richard Price. Though maybe the guy's guilty. Who knows? Michael Thompson, the famous AB, found guilty of perjury, fraud. His co-defendant, who he tried to blame it on, is already serving 8 years. So Thompson, I would imagine, is going to go back to prison and probably die there. He's 69. He'll go right back to the same protective custody I would imagine he was already in, where he was comfortable at. And he went out and he had his fun for a couple years, and he's now going back. He did the podcast rounds. He's one of the most narcissistic criminals, especially for somebody who's just a murderer. He's not that being a drug kingpin is good, but or a mafioso or something, or even a Mexican mafia, but at least that evinces some capability of performing complex actions, whereas Thompson just killed some people on a rural ranch and stole the guy's wife and some money and got caught. So Michael Thompson convicted, the biggest AB informant of all time. They let him out in 2019 and he put himself right back in. Out profit American dope.